Welcome back. Based on the last panel discussion, it was very apparent to me and in talking with a few of you during the break that I think the technology has advanced at a lightning speed, and apparently much more than I thought when it comes to power generation and transmission and distribution. So I think there are exciting things ahead. I think you agree with that, and even with computer generation capabilities. We are very fortunate today and honored to have Dave Lawler as our keynote speaker. As most of you probably know, he's the Chief Executive Officer of BP US's Lower 48 onshore exploration and production business. He's the director, is a director on the board of BP America Production Company, and the Lower 48 business operates across 5 states, from Texas up through to the north to the Rocky Mountains, and produces from ownership interest the company has in over 20,000 wells. He joined BP in 2014 from Sandridge Energy, where he served as Executive Vice President and Chief Operating Officer. And prior to joining Sandridge, Dave was Chief Executive Officer and President of Post Rock Energy Corporation here in the city and its predecessor entities. And he began his career as a production engineer with Conoco and later joined Burlington Resources, where he served in drilling engineering and well site leadership positions. He spent 10 years with Shell Exploration and Production Company in a series of roles with increasing responsibility and leadership responsibilities, including business planning for the Americas and engineering and operations manager for the U.S. Gulf Coast business unit. In addition to his role with BP, Dave now serves as a board member for the Texas Oil and Gas Association and the Mewburn College of Earth and Energy at OU. I know Mike is glad to have him on board there. He graduated from the Colorado School of Mines with a Bachelor of Science in Petroleum Engineering and earned his Master's of Business Administration from Tulane University. We're very pleased to have you here today. Glad you're here and honored that you're here. And join me in welcoming Dave Lawler.
Okay, good morning. Thank you for the kind introduction and the warm welcome. It's great to be with you today, both in person and also those on the webcast. As you just heard, my name is Dave Lawler, and I'm CEO of the BP Lower 48 entity. And what that is an entity that was really just separated from the parent, obviously a few years ago, in order so it could be a more competitive U.S. onshore company. So we tried to take away some of those larger company offshore and international procedures and policies and just focus here on the states. So I'll reflect on some of that as we go through the material today. But I'd like to start by thanking Dean Stice, who leads the College of Earth and Energy. Dean Stice and I have been friends for many, many years, and he's someone that holds my deepest professional and personal respect. He's just a first-class individual, and happy to be here with him today. In addition to Dean Stice, I'd like to thank Jay Jimerson, Chairman of the Energy Institute, and Dr. Ghosh for hosting today's event and inviting me to participate. And knowing we'd meet in this auditorium, it caused me to be somewhat more reflective than I have been in the past. This is for a couple of reasons. I'm going to share a new piece for you. So, not only was I here with Sandridge Energy for a couple of years, but I also started my career here with Kerr McGee 30 years ago. So this was the first building that I was actually in when I joined the oil and gas industry. And what was interesting about that time, and this is the reflective period, I remember that I was doing this thing called a repeat formation test analysis. And it was fairly difficult work, and I remember it was with very little computer support. And that just kind of stuck with me, doing some of these calculations by hand and having a limited access to the computing capacity that we have today. But the other thing that was very interesting is there was a coffee cart. You couldn't go to the coffee machine, you had to go to the coffee cart, which showed up every day at 9:30, and a bell would ring, and you'd walk out and you'd line up and get your coffee. And a coffee cost 15 cents, and it was very cold, but I needed it. Just like today, I have to have my coffee to get going. So anyway, times have certainly changed over the last 30 years. Well, since that first summer, I've spent a good portion of my career working here in Oklahoma, and I can share my appreciation for this state's contributions to the U.S. energy business. And there's a lot of significant leadership that's in this state, both at the institutional level and some of the dynamic leaders that have led the industry over the last few years. So it's just wonderful to be here. But I would also argue that today, the mission of the Energy Institute has never been more important than it is today. As you all know, the global energy landscape is changing faster than any moment in our entire life. And a variety of factors, including technological advances, geopolitical turmoil, and most notably the U.S. shale boom, have fundamentally altered the economics of oil and gas and have intensified the competitive pressure facing companies across the sector. At the same time that all this is happening, concerns over global climate change have prompted governments, industries, and in fact individuals around the world to demand action and to take action. And that's the piece I don't think that's always fully understood. There is a demand, but then there is also a demand for the action on reducing greenhouse gas emissions. So given the expanse and the complexity of the issues, it's challenging to provide a comprehensive narrative in a single conversation or presentation on what we'll call the future of energy. However, what I'll try to do is set the framework for a broader discussion, talk through some things that BP is doing, and then we'll move on to what I hope is a productive Q&A session. But more specifically, I'll talk about the most consequential changes occurring in the global energy industry, how BP itself is adapting to those changes, and finally, I'll talk about what policymakers can do to accelerate the lower carbon transition. My hope is by the end of my remarks, everyone will have a greater understanding of what I'll describe as the 5 key realities about the future of energy. So first, and I think you've talked a little bit about this over the last couple days, the transition to lower carbon energy sources is happening much faster than people predicted, and only just a few years ago. The train has left the station, and it's moving much, much faster than anyone could have predicted. Second, despite the rapid pace of the transition, we still need to do more. We, being government, industry, and individuals alike, if we hope to meet the emissions reduction goals set out in the Paris Climate Agreement. Third, the global energy transition is not simply about expanding the use of renewables. It's about reducing greenhouse gas emissions while also meeting increased demand for reliable, affordable energy, and I also think that's a thing that was discussed here the last few days. Fourth, and importantly, even in a highly aggressive low carbon scenario, and that's a scenario in which the world meets the initiative set out in Paris, oil and gas remains, and I want to be clear on this, a significant part of the global energy mix for decades to come. And finally, natural gas in particular has a crucial role to play not only as a bridge fuel, which is popularly discussed, but it also is a destination fuel. It's a destination fuel that can support renewable energy for the long run. So in terms of long-term energy trends, let me start by sharing a few numbers that will help illustrate the challenges that we face and the opportunities that we can seize. A few weeks ago, BP released its 2018 Energy Outlook report, which explores all the major trends shaping the global energy industry and offers several different scenarios for how the fuel mix might evolve out to the year 2040. Our outlook projects that if government policies, technology, and social preferences continue in the way they have for recent years, this scenario shows that energy consumption increases by 35%, with the entire increase driven by developing countries such as China and India. Consumption of renewable energy such as solar, wind, biomass, and biofuels increases over 400%. Now this is in with regard to the trajectory that we're on now, an increase of 400%. So it will be by far the world's fastest growing energy source. In terms of demand, renewables account for 14% of the primary energy consumed in 2040, compared with just 4% in 2016. And they gained demand share in the power sector faster than any other source of power in history. So meanwhile, the overall demand share of natural gas grows from 24 to 26%, but the demand share of oil drops from 33 to 27%, and the demand share of coal falls from 28 to 21%. So as a result, the global energy mix in 2040 turns out to be the most diverse the world has ever seen. And finally, the net global carbon dioxide emissions increase during this scenario by 10%. But that is less than the 55% increase between 1990 and 2016. So there has been a lot of progress over the last few decades. So what insight can these numbers provide to all of us? Well, for starters, they confirm, at least from BP's point of view, that the world will need significantly more energy in 2040 than it does today. And the renewables can play an important role and will play an important role in delivering that energy. However, the BP outlook also shows that if government policies, technology, and indeed social preferences continue to evolve the way they have recently, we won't come anywhere close to achieving the kind of emissions standards that we're looking to achieve with the Paris Climate Agreement. It's true that in BP's evolving transition scenario, the one I just described, that the net global CO2 emissions grow slower than they have in the past, but it certainly isn't going to stop the increase over time. They still increase by 10%. So by comparison, one of the scenarios that we've looked at is called the even faster transition scenario. And in this scenario, the world reduces emissions to a level consistent with Paris goals. And in that scenario, instead of just a 10% increase, we're looking at a 47% decrease by the year 2040. And in that, the global power sector becomes almost entirely decarbonized. So significant seismic changes would need to happen in order for this to become a reality. And all of this highlights the dual challenge that's facing policymakers, companies, and private citizens around the world. We have to meet the rising energy demand while simultaneously transitioning to a lower carbon economy. It's just a dual truth. I've shared a few numbers to help put the lower carbon challenge in perspective, but to put the energy demand in perspective, consider these figures. It's a fact that more than 1 billion people around the world still do not have access to electricity. More than 2.8 billion people still do not have access to clean cooking facilities. These figures come from the Independent International Energy Agency, which also estimates that the electrification rate in sub-Saharan Africa is only 43%. Put another way, the second decade into the 21st century, a majority of people in sub-Saharan Africa still do not have access to electricity. And that's why BP talks about it as a dual challenge. We have to continue providing the affordable, reliable energy that lifts people out of poverty and improves living standards, while at the same time transitioning to a lower carbon economy. So how do we want to do this? Well, from the BP perspective, we have decades of experience addressing this dual challenge. And today, all four components of our global strategy are working to advance a lower carbon future. So these components are, one, supporting low carbon investments across multiple sectors. Two, we're modernizing the entire company to make us safer and more competitive. And three, we're producing more oil efficiently while focusing on natural gas. And finally, we're pursuing market-led growth in our downstream business. We believe this strategy will help BP continue growing and delivering value to our shareholders while also supporting the lower carbon transformation that the world is expecting. So in the time I have left, I'll discuss how BP's business activities reflect each component of our global strategy. So in this first piece, I'll start with low carbon and our ventures work, which is significant and I don't think really is as well known as we would like it to be. So with more than 12 wind farms in the US and a massive biofuels business in Brazil, BP has the largest renewables portfolio of any major oil and gas company. Our US wind farms can produce enough electricity to power all the homes in a city the size of Philadelphia today. We also estimate that in 2016, a wind portfolio the size of BP's helped avoid nearly 3 million tons of CO2 emissions, amount equivalent to the annual energy-related emissions of 326,000 homes. Beyond our wind business, BP has a joint venture with DuPont to develop an advanced biofuel. It's called bioisobutanol. And in 2017, this joint venture, known as Butamax, acquired a state-of-the-art ethanol plant just north of us in Kansas. Also in 2017, we established a partnership with Clean Energy Fuels, which made BP the largest supplier of renewable natural gas to the U.S. transportation sector. At the global level, we also announced a $200 million investment in Europe's largest solar development company, which subsequently became Lightsource BP. In addition to these key investments, BP was a founding member of the Oil and Gas Climate Initiative, an effort started by 10 companies, including both international companies like BP and Shell, and national oil companies like Saudi Aramco and CNPC, that together represent more than 20% of the global oil and gas production. And this is the kind of combination that we've talked about, working together, getting everyone on board for the collective good. Part of this OGCI work is the creation of an OGCI Climate Investment Fund, which is backed by a collective pledge from the OGCI companies to invest over $1 billion in low-carbon technology over the next 10 years. So as you might expect, BP's venturing efforts also support the foundation of our global business strategy, which is to modernize the company across the entire world. And one way to do that is through digital technology. In our offshore business, BP has been collaborating with GE to pilot test what's known as Plant Operations Advisor. It's actually very exciting technology. It's designed to improve safety, reliability, and efficiency of the Gulf of Mexico operations. So just as an example, every day, Plant Operations Advisor performs 40 million calculations on 400 pieces of equipment on our BP Atlantis platform. And this helps the engineering team spot any abnormalities in the data and obviously keep the equipment online and running safely and efficiently. But the number of calculations here is more than there are daily hits on YouTube. And this is continuously running day in and day out. At our Cooper River Chemicals plant in South Carolina, we recently completed a $200 million modernization project that will reduce electricity by 40% and cut a significant 110,000 tons of carbon emissions per year, while boosting overall production of the plant by 10%. And here in the lower 48, my part of the business, we're using a mix of innovative technologies and drilling techniques, including data analytics, augmented reality, drone inspections, and multilateral well designs, which decrease the environmental footprint and the amount of equipment that's located on the surface. A few years ago, we completed our first ever multilateral well in the San Juan Basin. And the way to think about a multilateral well is it's essentially a group of horizontal laterals that are joined underground to a single take point and flow up a vertical wellbore. They're very efficient, very capital efficient, and they also have the effect of minimizing the impact to the environment and our activity in the West. So each of these technologies improve the safety of our operation and enhance the protection of the environment. The expansion of BP's natural gas operations in the lower 48 reflect a broader global emphasis on growing our gas portfolio. We consider gas absolutely crucial to the global energy transition, not only because it offers a lower carbon alternative to coal, but also because it provides the necessary backup for renewables like wind and solar. In the long term, natural gas is in fact a destination fuel. To appreciate the lower carbon benefits of gas, just look at the energy and emissions trends here in the U.S., the birthplace of the shale revolution. The U.S. Energy Information Administration estimates that between 2005 and 2017, America's energy-related CO2 emissions declined by 14%. The main reason for that decline was the enormous growth of natural gas in U.S. power generation. Whereas gas accounted for just 19% of the power generated in 2005, it accounted for 32% in 2017. In general, replacing coal with natural gas can cut greenhouse gas emissions from power generation almost 50%. And I should also note, while I have this opportunity, that the commitment to gas not only is linked to the upstream business, but we do manage and we're the number one marketer of natural gas here in the United States. For somewhere on the order of over 300 companies trade natural gas through BP. And all this conversation, or in the conversation about the lower carbon benefits, what we have to address is the methane challenge. Reducing methane emissions is a key area for the OGCI fund that I mentioned earlier, and it's also a key focus area for BP, which has worked hard over the years to understand and challenge this. I'm proud to share that our lower 48 business has achieved a number of methane reductions through voluntary actions over the last few years. For example, we've replaced around 99% of our high bleed pneumatic controllers with continuous low bleed and intermittent pneumatic controllers. And we've also reduced venting during liquids unloading by implementing enhanced automation, plunger lift, and optimized the shut-in cycles of our wells across the business. In addition, we've implemented green technology, which is a completion technology that minimizes any type of gas venting to the atmosphere during the completion process, and we did this before it was a regulatory requirement. We've also replaced a number of our chemical injection pumps with solar-powered pumps. In addition, we're analyzing various leak detection technologies, which will help us source and find any source of a methane leak and fix it quicker than we ever have in the past. In addition to producing gas more efficiently, BP is also working to produce oil more efficiently across the business. In the Gulf of Mexico, we used advanced seismic processing technology and supercomputer capability to find previously undiscovered a 1 billion barrel reservoir in place next to one of our existing fields. In Alaska, BP used enhanced oil recovery technology to hold production roughly constant for 3 consecutive years. It's a remarkable achievement given both the oil price environment and the fact that Prudhoe Bay has produced already several billion barrels of crude and significantly more than it expected in 1970. The fourth and final plank of BP's strategy is to pursue market-led growth in the downstream. This too is helping us advance a lower carbon future. In 2016, for example, Air BP, which provides jet fuel to airports, launched Environmental Solutions, a new package of products and services designed to help aircraft operators reduce their CO2 emissions. BP also has a world-class lubricants business. Many of you are probably familiar with the name Castrol. This is America's #1 motor brand. Many Castrol products do, in fact, boost engine efficiency and help drivers reduce their carbon intensity, and this is a choice that they can make by buying that product. In 2017, for example, the business launched Castrol Edge Bio, a USDA-certified motor oil made from the base stocks from sugarcane. These examples are just a few of what we're doing across the business to improve our position as a global leader. BP's continued investments in oil and gas reflect a simple reality. Despite the rapid growth of renewables, we believe in oil and gas, and oil and gas will remain a crucial part of the global energy mix for decades to come. In BP's energy outlook, the even faster transition scenario, and remember this is the scenario that aligns itself with the Paris agreements, even in that scenario, oil and gas still accounts for more than 40% of the global energy consumption in 2040. And just to be clear, the even faster transition scenario assumes that governments around the world adopt carbon pricing systems, which in turn we believe will spur widespread deployment of carbon capture, use, and storage. Whether or not that happens, BP will continue supporting carbon capture, usage, and storage technology by investing in the $1 billion OGCI initiative fund that I mentioned earlier. And I'll just take just a minute to talk about carbon pricing. And it really brings us to what government can do. And I'll say just a few words here. It's no secret that energy and environment issues have become deeply polarized over time, especially in Washington, but also in state houses across the country. Amid this polarization, BP hopes policymakers remember that energy production and environmental protection are not mutually exclusive. We can meet the world's rising demand for reliable and affordable energy while also reducing greenhouse gas emissions. Governments can help us achieve these objectives by creating a market-based energy framework that encourages greater competition, efficiency, and innovation. The best way to do that, in BP's view, would be to adopt a flexible, well-designed, economy-wide carbon pricing program. Across the world, carbon pricing has proven to be more effective, both from an economic perspective and from an environmental perspective, than top-down regulations that are intended to try and limit growth of oil and gas activity. So just one final thought before we move on to the question session. The challenge of energy and this challenge to reach a lower carbon economy sooner rather than later cannot be solved by one company, and certainly not by one industry single-handedly. Everyone has a role to play. If governments can adopt a sort of market-based framework that I just described, they can help establish the right incentives for energy producers and consumers alike. It's impossible to predict whether government policies will keep evolving the way they have in recent years, or whether carbon pricing will ever gain momentum. Either way, BP will continue doing our part to meet the world's growing energy needs while also advancing a low-carbon future. And we believe this is the essence of leadership. So thank you very much, and appreciate this time that you've given me to tell you about what we're thinking. Thank you. Okay.
Thank you. So capital allocation in our industry is very competitive, especially in our challenging commodity price environment. So how do you decide how much to invest in these lower carbon initiatives when they're likely not competitive on ROI or cash flow basis?
Right. Now that's I think that's a really good question. Naturally companies have to follow their own financial frame, whether they have dividends that they're trying to meet or capital programs, or they've taken FID on major projects around the world. But I think all of us, and it comes back a little bit to that leadership issue, it's if all of us will pause and think about where we're going other than single well economics, single well projects, then what you do is search for and you find dollars available in your budget to support what I think we all know is a very, very important theme for the world, not just this country. So I guess my answer would be this of, you can't optimize the near term and expect to have a long term. You have to have some view to the future. It's whatever you think.
David, I've got two questions. First, it's kind of just a funny question, I guess, but we work at Chesapeake and we see your brother's intensity on stage, and I'm curious who beat up who as growing up with you guys.
Well, I think we've shared this before. I was always a little stronger than Doug, but he was a lot faster than me, so it was a good combination if we were together. But anyway.
Thank you. My question is, we've talked a lot today about kind of the negative perception, especially with the millennial generation on oil and gas and production, as evidenced by Austin, Texas, and the frac ban in New York. So are there some creative ways that you guys can communicate to the millennial generation to kind of help shift that perception, which helps with legislation and things like that?
Yeah, no, I think that's a great question. I think that is something. We had an opportunity to have a dinner last night with several very high-quality OU students, and one of the things they talked about is there is this, well, oil and gas is up and down, there's a lot of pressure socially as to what kind of value it adds. And what I would just default to is that I think all of us have put forward and supported many campaigns that highlight the benefits of energy. But clearly it's not enough. We're not getting the right message across. And I think that collectively we might be able to do a better job. I think if we act individually, similar with this OGCI, if we can come up with a broader program that's very effective, instead of spending dollars discreetly, we'll probably end up and be able to reach more people. But I also believe companies like BP taking a leadership position, now as being able to say, we are the top renewables company in the world. That shows our commitment. Now, hopefully people will hear that those investments are being made, and they're real dollars that are being spent. But we do have to do a better job of getting the message out. And I think we can do that better collectively than individually. Yours.
Okay, Dave, I'm going to follow up on that. So there are some students here. There are also some recent grads here. What kind of advice would you give to either our students, your daughter, Doug's daughter, and so just a piece of advice for all the young people entering into the business?
Would this be personal coaching or professional coaching? I would try to tell all young people going into the industry. It's kind of three things, and I know that I've got some of my great BP colleagues with me here, but this is the same thing that I share with everybody, and I think it applies early in your career, late in your career. Don't ever be defensive. When you're defensive, you stop listening. And let's think a little bit about what's happening now. The world is telling us they want to take a different direction. Now, we can ignore that, or we can help and be a part of the solution. And when you start off in your career, if you're a listener and you're not defensive about your work, you're going to end up and go a lot further. But what I usually see is, it's the three things, is don't be territorial, don't be defensive, and always listen. I mean, those are the key things that I think move people along. And then if you've got raw initiative and you want to make a difference in the world, if you kind of possess those skills and have the right ethics framework around you, I think ultimately you'll do pretty well. Is that helpful, or was that the wrong direction, Steve?
So thanks a lot, David. Really bold talk. Progressive, the kind of thing the industry needs to advance its message, social license and everything. Maybe not a message all your peers agree with in the United States. So OGCI is pretty European-centric. What are the reactions you're getting to this? And if we're better collective than we are alone, how do you bring your peers along with that bold statement?
That's a good point. So how the BP message has been received, that's an excellent question. What I might point out is that 20 years ago, Lord Brown went to a conference at Stanford University, and 20 years ago he identified the concerns that we're talking about today. BP, we feel like we've always been at the forefront of the conversation, and at that time, his comments were not well received. And I think that really comes back to this concept of leadership. You make decisions based on reasonable information, feedback that people are giving you, and I think paying attention to what's happening in the world. And you may or may not have people support you when you decide to make a decision. And I think for all of us who have been in a spot and have had the gift of being in a leadership position, you very frequently find yourself alone. And what I would encourage everyone to do is to have the courage to step forward, take a stand, make a difference, and eventually I think we'll bring people along if that's the approach. Does that make sense, Mike? Okay. All right. Well, thank you very much. Appreciate your time greatly.
David, thanks for sharing your insights about the future of energy and sharing some of BP's insights and strategic initiatives concerning the future of energy. A lot for us to think about. I'm excited about the future of energy. That includes both renewables and hydrocarbon-based energy sources, and I hope you all are too. Thank you for coming again this year. For those of you that are back again for the first time, attendees at the conference, thanks for coming, and I hope we see all of you again next year. Thank you.